Hi, Mark Ford here. I'm here today with John Stoltzfus. Now, John and I have never met, so I'm excited to learn about what he's doing. I do know this. I do know that he is not right now a full-time copywriter, that he actually still has a job. So I'm going to... And your job is aerospace engineering, is that right?
Yeah, my degrees are aerospace engineering. I actually worked in the defense industry for 18 years. Got laid off 3 years ago, so now I work for an engineer software company. Wow. So I still do a lot of the engineering stuff.
Wow. So you are basically somebody that studied science, and you were a science guy. And wow, how did that? Because you know that's a. Did you want to be a writer when you were a kid? Was there any writing in there?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. I actually won a creative writing award in high school.
Oh, wow.
Through I forget, I think it was Scholastic, but one of those organizations that runs the writing contests. Always enjoyed writing, even doing essays in school. Through college, I took a creative writing course, even as an engineer, as one of my electives. And then as I worked my way up as an engineer, my supervisors found that I was one of the few engineers who had the ability to communicate with other people. And so that often put me in a position of putting together presentations, putting me out in front of customers. So I've given hundreds of briefs over the years. I gradually worked into a project management role then, where I was able to oversee people and kind of see that big picture, make those connections. From there, they said, hey, this is great. You're good in front of people. You know how to talk about these things, see connections. We want to get you into business development. So then I became a business development and marketing manager, where I was writing more of the government proposals, and I was writing brochures and fact sheets and things like that. But along the way, I was working 70 to 80 hours a week. In defense, we call that the back 40, the hours you work that you don't get paid for. And I was looking for something else. I was so tired of doing that, and I had started exploring things, and I saw copywriting. I was like, wow, this is interesting.
One of the things I read about a lot is having a financially valuable skill. And I say it's great because you can often use it to become independent, but also within a business, it can be very powerful. And being an engineer is certainly financially valuable. Knowing medicine and so on. But the problem, I said this to my son when he went to school. He studied engineering too, computer engineering. I said that, it's fine, but you just need to know that if you're working for a business, even with all your knowledge, you're still on the expense side of the ledger. You are somebody that they need, and the more you earn, the more problematic you are for them.
More vulnerable you are.
Yeah, you're kind of more vulnerable. So I said that really there are just certain very basic fundamental skills that can make you successful in any business. One is writing well, speaking well, and then knowing how to produce or manage profits. So you were in that kind of ministry, working 70 hours, but you actually were promoted almost to the top because of your ability to, and obviously you already had an ability to write, you could communicate, because writing well and communicating well really means, for the most part, knowing how to persuade, explain and persuade. And so it's really about power. And so there you were. In any case, you're working 70 hours, so how did you even find out about
Well, I've also been a private investor, investing my own money since probably the late 90s. Signed on with Stansberry and Associates in early 2000s time frame. I forget which promotion I bought it on. Became an alliance member with them. And then one of these years when I was looking for side jobs, things I could do at home, even a career change potentially, and stumbled across copywriting, and I started reading a little about it. It all of a sudden just dawned on me that all the promotions that I had, that had triggered me to buy these products, someone was getting paid to write them. And I had actually considered going back and getting a degree in finance and becoming a financial advisor, because I really loved the investing side of it. But to do that, you've got to do the 2,500 hours of training full time. You can't do it part time. And I thought, okay, well, I can't do that. And then I realized that someone was getting paid to write these. They had to be doing investment research. They were writing these cool stock teases. And I thought, wow, this is really great. I can combine the stock research and the investing topics that I love and writing and get paid for it. And so I bought the course, and that was back in 2006, the accelerated course, but I was still working a ton of hours, so I just couldn't do much with it. And then, like I said, I got laid off in 2013. And
so just to stop you there, so that's just the point we're making. You had worked yourself all the way up to the, the higher echelons of that business. They were paying you more. The business goes through, the industry goes through a tough period. And who do they lay off first? The people who are making a lot of money and are on the expense side of the ledger.
Yep, right? It was Memorial Day weekend of 2013, and the company, had their own issues. Their books didn't balance. They were worse than GM in some respects. And so they were constantly trying to cut costs and cut those overhead people. Right. And so they actually laid off about 50 of us in the middle management types, the people who did business development, the support types, and they left all those scientists and engineers who don't know how to communicate with anyone.
Right.
And so they probably put themselves in a worse position, but they were financially, they were stuck and they had to do something. Right. So unfortunately I was one of those people, but in hindsight it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I was so tired of working in that industry and just being bogged down. Right. And
now are you married?
Yes, I am.
You were married at the time?
Yep.
You have kids?
Married with 3 kids.
Okay, so you've got responsibility.
Exactly.
You've got to keep earning.
Yep, so I had to act quickly. Unfortunately, I found a job within a month, but at that same time I said, you know what, I'm going to go back and look at this copywriting stuff, because I don't want to ever be stuck like this, powerless again.
Right.
Because at that time I had options I could go to quickly by relocating from Pennsylvania to D.C., but I didn't want to have to move my wife and my kids, different stages of school. That's a tough transition to make.
Right. So where did you see the first promotion from AWAI? Do you remember?
I'm pretty sure it was the Retire This Year promotion.
Right.
I think that was about the right time frame for it. I can't remember whether I actually bought it based on that one, or whether I bought based on the simple letter one. But I think it was the Retire This Year, and I did what a lot of people do. I looked around. I kind of did some digging, Better Business Bureau, read some reviews. I saw a bunch of people saying, "Oh, these people are a scam. They bring you in," and of course I was skeptical, and my wife was even more so skeptical. But at the time, I don't remember what I paid at the time.
By the way, I think 80% of those scam things come from one person.
Probably.
He was a very unscrupulous business guy, so we stopped promoting him, and so he went into full-time business of writing those things. Then he would get clients from those things. Anyway, of course, anytime you go into, you hear about a way to make money on the side, people are skeptical.
Exactly.
So, especially the smarter you are, the more skeptical you're going to be. So you get the course. The course material is what it is, and so. How did you move from being skeptical, looking at the coursework, you're still working full-time with a new job, to actually the time when you started writing copy?
Yep. Well, fortunately, the new job was a more traditional 40-hour-a-week job, but even with flexibility, it was essentially put your 40 hours a week in, whatever works for you.
Right.
So, I had some flexibility there. I decided to start looking at it from the technical perspective, kind of embracing what you know. And I reached out to a couple, local tech companies that I said, hey, would you like some help writing, brochures, some of your, marketing materials? Did a little bit of that work, but then at the same time, I started realizing, I could really get myself into a conflict of interest bind here. I'm working with a company that works for engineering companies all over the world, and if I end up taking on a job writing something for a competitor, it could get tricky.
Yeah.
And I said, I probably ought to branch out a little bit, and I decided to buy the financial course because, again, that's what I enjoy, getting up and watching CNBC and really following the markets. And so I bought the financial course, and one of the things that I loved about that was, hey, if you go through this, you can get Paul Hollingshead to help you out with and mentor one of your projects. And so I did that, kind of started working through that project, which took me into 2014. And I knew I kind of wanted to move forward and do something, but I needed that kick. And that year I happened to get the COS promotion, which said, hey, if you sign up now, you can get boot camp for life. I thought, I've thought about this. I really ought to do this. And if I can go for free, and if this really works. And at the same time, I was thinking, I've still got that doubt. I've got to figure out for myself if this is real. Right. And if I go to this live event and see all these people and talk to these marketers, and maybe it'll actually become real for me.
Right. That's great. You know, so many of our successful graduates, what have you, had the very same feeling. They were enjoying the course, they were learning, but there was still a gap between that experience and the belief that this is real, and they could actually, AWI could help them take that next step.
Right.
And somehow with the boot camp, and I think it's different for different people. Sometimes it's just the energy, sometimes it's the people they run into, sometimes it's the job fair, but something about going there. So what was it, what happened when you went to the, what were the things you were surprised about, and
Sure. Well, I guess going into it, I think what really helped me the most was that I had made a conscious decision beforehand that if I was going to spend the money to come down here and try out boot camp in 2014, I was darn well going to try to get the most out of it. Right. And so I submitted 7 specs that year. I mean, I submitted 2 or 3 to AWAI, 1 to Bottom Line Publishing. I wrote a 20-page promo for Clayton Makepeace's spec contest. You know, I had never written any before, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to go full bore. I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens.
Now, had you finished the financial writing course?
Yep. Yeah, I'd gone through that completely. You know, I'd read a bunch of controls. Of course, I had been getting the ones from Stansberry and everyone else for years, so I mean, I was familiar with them anyway.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's good because you were a consumer of that publication.
Yep.
You were an enthusiast. You weren't a professional. You had no professional degree. You didn't bother to try. You know, some people think, well, if I'm going to write about health, do I have to go back and get a...
Right.
No. You just had a natural interest in it, and you were enthusiastic. You took the basic course because there are, in selling anything, there are steps and there are things you need to do. You can't just be enthusiastic. So, but really, what had happened, because you had been reading all those newsletters of promotions, you actually already had somewhere in your brain a sense of how these things
The structure was there somewhere.
Right. That's terrific. And so, so what happened next?
Well, after that, I went to boot camp. I had submitted all those specs, and you know, I've always been more of an introvert, so I tended to hang around the walls. But I tried to throw myself out there, introduce myself to people. Actually saw Clayton, and I decided, you know what? I sent something to him. I'm going to go up and say hi. Introduced myself. He actually recognized my name. Said, "Yeah, I remember your spec. It was really good." I thought, this is great. Clayton Makepeace is telling me it was very good. And I actually used that. Everyone I talked to for the next 3 days said, "Oh, did you write any specs?" I said, "Yeah, I actually wrote one for Clayton. He said it was very good." And when I would tell that to marketers, they'd be like, "Well, great. Can I see it?" Because they're like, "Well, if Clayton said it's very good, can I use that?" Well, then it dawned on me, well, when I go to job fair, I'm going to do the same thing. So as I walked around job fair and I introduced myself to people, I told them who I was, what my story was, and I said, I wrote a bunch of specs, including a full one for Clayton, first one I've ever done, but he did say it was very good. I'm hoping to win his contest on Saturday. Every single one of them. Would you mind sending it to me? Because again, in a lot of cases, most of us just starting out haven't gotten to the point of writing a full promotion yet. And the marketers realize that it's probably not going to be great. I mean, we're all still learning this, but just the fact that they know you went through the process of it, being able to see what research you pulled in, do you have the basic structure? It lets them know how close you are. So I actually, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in my spotlight presentation on Saturday, but I went through and got to the award ceremony Saturday. I'm sitting there going, yeah, I'm going to get one of these checks. I'm going to win something, and nothing. Got to the end. I'm like, wow, this sucks. Rode to the airport, and I'm like, man, I'm a failure. I'm going to have to go back and tell my wife I spent all this money, and there's nothing here. But I kind of course-corrected myself and said, you know what? I made a lot of good connections. There's people to follow up on. I've still got all these specs that they didn't decide yet. And so I laid out a plan to continue to follow through with the different marketers that I had spoken to. And by November, I found out that I won the spec challenge from Eagle Financial, which was a $500 check. So paid for part of my hotel. Got me my first job with them, and wrote my first promotion for them in January 2015. And it actually became a control.
Wow, that's terrific.
So that was a great start, and from there it's just kind of been, a snowball really going downhill.
You still are working full time, but you're making good money. You're already.
I am.
You're in the 6-figure category. I heard about already.
Yeah, I've got really 4 clients right now. Between them all, I'm making more than 6 figures a year, and everyone asks me this question: well, why are you still working?
Right.
And a couple of people have even asked me for advice, and I said, you know what? What you have to remember is this is a personal decision for everyone. Everyone's situation is different.
Right.
In my case, as you already kind of caught on, I had a series of promotions. I moved my way up the ladder.
Right.
I've been a very successful engineer. I already make well into 6 figures. And I've got the nice house. I built the dream house, designed it and built it myself even. So I've got everything that we wanted as a family, and that lifestyle matches the income that I earned for myself. So for me, I have to, and I think maybe it's a little unique having been laid off 3 years ago. And for 1 month being worried, what comes next? How am I going to support my family? I've been foolish for 20 years and don't have that 6 month savings they tell you should have. What have I been doing? And so I'm very cautious now in that not only do I need to be making a good salary, a replacement level salary, but it has to be consistent. You have my 4 clients, only one of them do I get a check every month. Otherwise it's based on jobs, or sometimes they're late, or, so that's not a replacement level income for my job yet. So I've got to be very careful.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You have, instead of replacing your income, your 6-figure income, you basically doubled it.
Right.
Yeah. And so that gives you, you have a choice. You can either spend all that extra income,
which I'm not doing,
or you
maybe
can,
a little.
Yeah,
you got to reward yourself.
I do that too. You got to give yourself something like 5%. It's amazing how little of the extra income you need to make yourself feel good. It could be some kind of little toy or whatever. But so you're investing that, and you're still young. You're still you have no problem working these. You're probably working 60 hours a week.
I work 70 to 80 hours a week. I tell people I've worked at least some hours every single day for the past 18 months. It's just part of the deal.
Then, it's just the way some people are. And I've been that way my whole life pretty much. My wife and I we have 2 kind of vacations. One where I work and one where I don't work. Where I work means I work all day and then we go out at night. Where I don't work means I work until noon and then we go out all day. So, it's in my nature. I enjoy the work, and so I'm always going to do it. I'll do it if I get paid for it or not. And so in your case, what I think is great is that this is a whole new thing that people can consider, that you're not really ready to trust either of these things. You're doing well in both of them. You've done well before. Chances are you would continue to do well in either of them. But why not? As long as you can do it, why not just do them both? Take that money, invest it, and you'll in 5 or 6 years you'll forget about whatever money you had before. You'll be a $1 million investment.
I hope so.
And you certainly follow my advice. Sure. So rental real estate. Anyway. That's great, because I think a lot of people out there are, we have guys that were doctors and lawyers that have come in, and they certainly have a high income. And one of the guys that I mentored was a doctor. He had an okay practice, but he wasn't loving it. Now he learned copywriting, and then he started his own business, and now he has a very substantial business. So there's all kinds of good things that come from it. So, any more advice that you'd give people for? I mean, I know you're just like, you're practically a baby in the business, but you've had this great success. You've won a couple of contests. You're making great 6-figure income. How about advice for people that aren't willing to work 80 hours a week?
Sure. And actually, this is a piece of advice that I'm going to give in my spotlight again on Saturday, because while I've been a success story, I certainly have had my bumps and the mistakes I've made and some things like that. And I think one of the things that I would tell people is, if you really want to do this, you'll see people like me who are very, very hungry, and they will work tons of hours. And one of my biggest problems was not saying no. I took on every client I've had an opportunity to take on the last 18 months, primarily because I wanted to learn from a variety of people. And I've found the different copy chiefs I have, one person will tell me to do it one way, and if I do it that way for the other client, they say, no, I don't like this. And so it's great getting the different perspectives. So on the one hand, I would encourage people to really get out there and work for multiple clients.
Right.
You know, rather than going, you know, full in on one client right away, because you're going to get that different, you know, experience. Their feedback is different for everyone, but to not take it all on, because there's no doubt I've gotten a little bit overwhelmed. Because what I ended up doing was not allowing time for life to happen.
Right.
And I'm not talking taking time out for my kids or my wife for vacations. We do that, but it's the, oh, my wife is sick this weekend and I've got to run the kids everywhere, or I'm sick this weekend. And for me in that position, if I lose a weekend, it's like losing 2 weeks. Because it just sets me back so far. And as a result, you know, I've missed some of the deadlines that I've had, which, you know, fortunately my clients have all been flexible because they know that I'm trying to juggle this with the career, and they're allowing me that flexibility because they see the promise and they see the success that I'm having even with their products. So they want to give me a little bit of rope. That doesn't happen with everyone. I've been fortunate in that way. So I certainly would recommend to people that, you know, pace yourself, be conservative in how much time you think things are going to take. You know, don't get overly aggressive no matter how hungry you are.
That's good advice. You know, I basically the same way. You know, that people say, should you say yes or should you say no? You know, and my feeling is I was always a yes man. There was nothing I wouldn't take on. Of course, you know, 3 months later, I'm going, why did I ever do that? But so I think it depends on your personality, really. If you're a yes personality, like you and I are, we're going to take on everything. Then you need to know how to say no. And some of your advice, I think, is good. The most important thing, I had to learn it too, is if you're a yes guy, usually you minimize the time and effort something will take, because you just want to say yes. You know, so, oh, I'll do that and whatever. So the advice there is to learn how to say no once in a while. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't mean they'll never talk to you again. You know, I somehow I was always afraid of that. And then also be realistic about your time. If you are a no person, by that I mean if you're reluctant to actually get involved, then you know those people need skills in saying yes. You know, how do you? You know, you said in a way socially, you said you were a little bit. You're not naturally going up, and you somehow learned how to do that. And I think that's so important. You know, it is a skill. I remember my partner's son came to me, and this is true for a lot of writers. People that come to writers, were naturally probably a little bit taciturn. We're probably a little bit uncomfortable, you know, doing like door-to-door selling or whatever. And that's why we like writing. We like communicating. We want to be in touch with people. So he was kind of that way too. And I just wanted to experiment. So I told him that he could learn to be really super successful on the phone. The internet was already there. He could do email, but I told him that you'll never be successful unless you call people up. Now, I never call people up. I still don't call people up. I can't do that. But I just thought that it might be a skill that he could benefit from. So I pretended that I learned to do it. I do whatever I could. And that kid, I mean, within 2 or 3 months, he was calling everybody up. And he was making connections, and he was growing his business just on the skill of being in touch with people. So in a small way, I think writers, the people that are out there, if you're feeling shy about making contacts, just know that most of the people in the room are doing that too. And know that if you do walk up and do what you do and introduce yourself, that you know nobody's going to actually. They're not going to just stand around and go, "What's that tie you're wearing?" And nobody's going to just laugh at you. That's probably not going to happen. And people will be genuine. And if you find you did another thing I think which is smart too, is that you approach somebody that you already had a connection, you already done. You know, I advise people that if they're going to look for a job, and it would be the same in the job fair, know who the market is beforehand, know what they do. I mean, if you've got a copywriter there that's working for a big company, it would be pretty cool for you to go up and say, boy, I saw that last promotion you did with such and such a headline. That was the best thing I ever saw. One thing that people I've discovered, maybe it's only true of myself, is even if people know you're flattering them, as long as you're specific and they know you've taken the time, it still feels good for them. Before we leave, I want to ask you about one more thing. I just heard that you have just won the most recent 10,000K challenge. Is that right?
Yes, it is. I found out from Katie in Denver at Clayton Makepeace's event in August, and I'm very excited to get it.
Well, that's terrific. Well, obviously you don't need the money now, but to get the recognition after you were snubbed that first time when you didn't win all the awards, that must feel great.
It does, and I definitely set that as a goal that first year after being shut out. So to get here in 2 years is very satisfying.
Phenomenal. Thank you, and thanks very much for sharing your experiences and your good insights with our people. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
All right.